Imagine a multi-billion-dollar medical industry where treatments are aggressively marketed to women as this kind of, cellular magic.
Right, promising to just completely revolutionize their sexual health.
Exactly. But then you look for the rigorous, heavily funded clinical trials testing those exact same regenerative treatments, and you find they are exclusively focused on male erections.
Yeah, it's quite the paradox, honestly.
Yeah.
Welcome to the murky, highly lucrative world of vaginal exosome therapy.
It really is wild. We are looking at a landscape where high-end clinics worldwide are offering cutting-edge therapies to women based on, biological theories.
Right, while the gold standard structured clinical data is currently being gathered entirely on men.
And that brings us to the core of this deep dive. We're thrilled to have you with us today because our mission for you is singular.
We are going to cut through a literal mountain of marketing noise to explore a highly specific, very buzzy question.
Do vaginal exosome treatments actually improve sexual sensation, climax, and overall arousal?
To get you a real answer, we've assembled a uniquely diverse stack of sources for this deep dive.
Yeah, we're evaluating detailed luxury clinic brochures from places like the Bioscience Institute and Vi Aesthetics.
Which, outline the commercial promises being made. But we're crossing those marketing materials with official medical guidelines from the British Society of Sexual Medicine.
We're also analyzing global industry market reports from TechSci Research and, most importantly, diving into actual registered clinical trial data to see where the science currently stands.
Because the gap between the marketing and the science is fascinating.
Okay, let's unpack this, because if you have paid any attention to the anti-aging or wellness space lately, you have probably heard the word exosome thrown around like it's the new fountain of youth.
Oh, absolutely. It's everywhere.
Right. It's in face creams, it's injected for hair loss, and now it's like the premier offering for vaginal rejuvenation.
But before we can even touch on orgasms and arousal, we really need to understand what an exosome actually is.
Especially since these clinics are rushing to replace older technologies with them.
Yeah, the transition in the market is happening rapidly, and the marketing often deliberately conflates exosomes with stem cells.
I noticed that. They make it sound like the exact same thing.
Right, but they are related, but fundamentally distinct. Exosomes are microscopic extracellular vesicles.
Okay, vesicles.
Yeah, in the context of the therapies we're looking at, they are secreted by mesenchymal stem cells, or MSCs.
When I look at how the sources describe them, they sound like these microscopic delivery packets. The best way I can visualize it is to think of them as cellular text messages.
That is a perfect analogy, yeah.
Like they aren't the stem cell itself, they are just the instructions the cell sends out.
Exactly. They carry messenger RNA, lipids, and proteins to other cells in the body.
Basically telling those receiving cells how to behave, right?
Right. The text message analogy works beautifully, but let's take it a step further. It's a text message that physically alters the phone of the person receiving it.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's a powerful text.
The critical distinction here is that exosomes are cell-free. Traditional living stem cell therapy involves taking actual living cells and introducing them into a patient's body.
And the hope there is that the living cells survive the transfer, integrate into the local tissue, and, differentiate to repair the area.
Exactly, and that process is biologically complex. It requires incredibly careful storage.
And there's always a lingering risk that the patient's immune system will identify those foreign living cells as a threat and just reject them.
Yeah, exactly. But because exosomes are cell-free, you bypass that entirely.
You are just injecting the text messages without the actual living entity.
Which makes the treatment vastly more stable. They're easier to freeze and store, and you drastically lower the risk of an immune reaction.
So you are essentially harnessing the communication power of a stem cell without the baggage of the cell itself.
That's it, exactly.
Looking at these older treatments, though, and I do want to push back on the idea that this space is entirely new, women have been seeking out treatments for vaginal laxity, dryness, and sensation for years.
Oh, for sure. Our sources show a long history of older technologies.
Right. The history of this field is crucial for understanding why exosomes are taking over. Because for a long time, the options were largely destructive or temporary.
Yeah, look at the CO2 lasers like the Mona Lisa Touch. The sources note these treatments take about 20 to 30 minutes.
Where the doctor inserts a probe and the laser literally vaporizes tiny microscopic columns of tissue in the vaginal wall.
Right. Then we have radiofrequency treatments like Votiva that heat the underlying tissue.
And on the injectable side, we have things like Diserial, which uses hyaluronic acid, and the O-Shot, which uses platelet-rich plasma, or PRP, spun down from the patient's own blood.
Yeah, looking at these older methods, burning tissue to force a healing response or relying on whatever platelets happen to be in your blood that day, it feels incredibly medieval compared to the exosome approach.
It really does. It seems like the market is abandoning lasers because they are fundamentally destructive, whereas exosomes are purely constructive. Is that a fair read of the landscape?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you are observing a fundamental philosophical shift in aesthetic medicine.
How so?
Well, the Mona Lisa Touch and Votiva rely entirely on tissue ablation or controlled thermal damage. You are creating a micro-injury.
So the body registers that damage, goes into emergency repair mode, and produces collagen as a byproduct of healing the wound.
Exactly.
It really is like tearing down a wall in your house just to force the contractors to show up and build a slightly better one.
That's a great way to put it. And while that emergency response can be effective, I mean, the sources do note that the Mona Lisa Touch improves lubrication and elasticity for many women, it still inherently relies on causing stress and trauma to the tissue.
Right. And on the other hand, the serial injections are simply temporary fillers.
Yeah, hyaluronic acid is fantastic at holding water, so it helps with hydration, but it isn't fundamentally changing the long-term cellular behavior of the tissue.
And the O-shot, which has been massively popular, it seems to have a standardization problem.
A huge one, yeah. Using PRP relies on the growth factors present in your own blood at that specific moment.
So if you're older or dealing with an autoimmune issue or just stressed, the signal in your blood is going to be weaker.
Which is exactly why exosomes represent such a massive pivot. They offer pure, highly concentrated, standardized regenerative signaling.
You aren't damaging the tissue to provoke a trauma response, and you aren't relying on the variable quality of a patient's own aging platelets.
Right, you're directly instructing the existing struggling cells to regenerate, build collagen, and calm inflammation using the optimized signals of young, healthy stem cells.
Which brings us to the core of the biology. Understanding that exosomes act as these targeted cellular signals, how do those specific instructions theoretically translate into better sexual sensation, climax, and arousal?
Because a text message telling a cell to make collagen is one thing, but an orgasm is a wildly complex neurological and physical event.
Right, so to understand the bridge between a microscopic cellular signal and a physical climax, we really have to look at the mode of action claimed by therapies like Exofemale, which is heavily detailed in the Bioscience Institute brochures.
Yeah, they utilize adipose-derived mesenchymal stem cell exosomes, meaning these specific signals are harvested from fat tissue.
And they highlight several highly sophisticated biological mechanisms, the most critical being angiogenesis.
Angiogenesis, the creation of new blood vessels.
Right. The sources mention that exosomes transfer pro-angiogenic factors, specifically a protein called VEGF, to the endothelial cells.
But instead of just listing the acronyms, let's look at what that actually means for the person experiencing it.
Yeah, because vascular endothelial growth factor, or VEGF, is essentially the biological blueprint for laying down new infrastructure.
Exactly. When the exosomes deliver VEGF to the local tissue, it signals the body to grow new, healthy blood capillaries.
And in the context of sexual function, robust blood flow is absolutely everything.
It is, because arousal at its most fundamental mechanical level relies on vascular engorgement. If you have poor vascularity, everything is blunted.
Right. When a woman becomes aroused, increased blood flow to the clitoral complex and the vaginal tissues is what triggers the swelling, the increased nerve sensitivity, and the natural transudation of fluid that causes lubrication.
So if the vascular network is degraded due to age, lack of estrogen, or trauma, the physical response simply cannot happen, regardless of psychological desire.
Wow, so by building new blood vessels, exosomes theoretically restore the physical capacity for engorgement.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because climax isn't just about muscular tightness, which is what so much of the older, slightly problematic marketing focused on.
Oh, completely. The whole vaginal tightening narrative completely missed the point.
Right. Climax is actually about the microscopic health of the tissue and that localized blood flow. If the tissue is thin, fragile, and poorly oxygenated, the nerve endings aren't going to respond the way they should.
And that biological reality ties directly into the next mechanism detailed in our sources, which is tissue renewal and extracellular matrix, or ECM, remodeling.
Okay, ECM remodeling.
Yeah, the exosomes instruct the cells in the vaginal epithelium, that's the outermost surface layer, to proliferate. More importantly, they regulate fibroblasts, instructing them to synthesize fresh collagen and elastin.
Let's ground that in the reality of what women actually experience, especially during menopause. When estrogen levels drop, the tissue physically thins out, which is a condition known as atrophy.
And thin tissue loses its elasticity. It becomes incredibly fragile. It tears easily during intimacy, and it hurts.
Right. If you've ever experienced that kind of painful intimacy, you know that a surface-level over-the-counter lubricant doesn't solve the root issue. It's a structural problem.
Exactly. So by remodeling the extracellular matrix, exosomes are theoretically restoring that thick, resilient, youthful tissue architecture.
They are rebuilding the structural support that houses the nerve endings.
Yes, and the sources also spent a lot of time on antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effects. They specifically mention that exosomes transfer molecules like SOD superoxide dismutase and glutathione peroxidase.
I mean, those sound like ingredients you'd find in a hyper-expensive green juice.
Right. But on a cellular level, they are protecting the tissue from oxidative stress. Plus, the exosomes contain molecules that help regulate vaginal pH.
Which is crucial for preventing the bacterial and fungal infections that cause chronic daily discomfort.
We have to synthesize why all of this microscopic activity, the antioxidants, the collagen, the new blood vessels, matters for arousal.
Right. How does it all come together?
Well, these antioxidants essentially act as a cellular fire extinguisher, putting out localized inflammation. When a woman is experiencing reduced sensation or dyspareunia, which is the medical term for painful sex, it rarely happens in a vacuum.
It stems from a hostile cellular environment. Chronic inflammation, tissue atrophy, a disrupted pH, and poor blood flow all compound one another.
Exactly. It is functionally impossible to get into the psychological headspace required for climax if your physical baseline is burning, itching, or pain.
The psychological and neurological pathways for arousal just get completely short-circuited by the physical discomfort.
And that is the crux of the biological argument. By addressing the root cellular environment, by reducing that chronic inflammation with molecules like SOD, by building new blood vessels with VEGF, and by thickening the fragile tissue with new collagen, exosomes theoretically create the optimal physical conditions necessary for enhanced sexual pleasure.
So they aren't an aphrodisiac pill. They're repairing the physical hardware so the neurological software can actually run properly.
That's a great way to think about it.
Okay, looking at this biological breakdown, the theory is undeniably compelling. It makes total logical sense on a cellular level. But theory is one thing. If I am reading this, I'm sold, but I want to know who is actually paying out of pocket for this right now.
Right.
Does the hard clinical evidence actually match these very expensive, very persuasive luxury clinic brochures?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question, and the data reveals a massive divide. If we look at the market analysis from TechSci Research, the global vaginal rejuvenation market is absolutely exploding.
How big are we talking?
It's projected to reach an astounding $6.72 billion by 2031.
Wow. That is a staggering amount of money for out-of-pocket procedures.
And the report notes this growth is fueled by record investments, specifically highlighting $2.6 billion in 2024 alone going into femtech venture capital.
And the stated goal of this capital is to destigmatize intimate wellness and market these solutions directly to consumers.
Yeah, they are heavily targeting postpartum women to address tissue laxity after childbirth, menopausal women to address atrophy, and women broadly who are experiencing sexual dysfunction.
They are packaging this not as a medical intervention, but as essential self-care.
It is a brilliant, highly effective marketing repositioning, moving vaginal health from a medical niche to a mainstream lifestyle category.
But when we step outside of the glossy brochures and the femtech venture capital pitches and look at the official medical guidelines, a starkly different picture emerges.
Oh, very different. Let's look at the British Society of Sexual Medicine, the BSSM. They published a comprehensive position statement on the management of GSM, which stands for genitourinary syndrome of the menopause.
Which is the exact medical condition causing the dryness, pain, and loss of sensation that these exosome clinics are targeting.
Right. The BSSM strongly recommends local hormones. They talk extensively about vaginal estrogen to restore the pH and thicken the epithelium.
And they specifically cite randomized controlled studies showing that DHEA pessaries improve arousal, lubrication, and sexual satisfaction.
Yeah, they even mention that lasers, like the carbon dioxide ones we discussed, have observational studies suggesting they improve sexual function.
But when you read through those comprehensive evidence-based BSSM guidelines, there is a glaring
A
omission.
huge one, exosomes.
They do not mention exosome therapy at all.
Not once. The official guidelines lean heavily on tested hormones and cautiously on lasers.
There is a massive evidence gap here between what the clinics are selling and what the medical societies are endorsing. And this gap becomes even more jarring when you look at the actual clinical trial registries in our sources.
This raises an important question about who actually benefits from the rigorous, highly funded, double-blind clinical trials required to prove clinical efficacy.
Right, because we found a formal clinical trial registered on clinicaltrials.gov under the identifier NCT 07319533.
And it is officially investigating MSC-derived exosomes for sexual dysfunction.
And this is the part that literally made me stop reading the source material and do a double take. The trial isn't for female sensation or vaginal atrophy.
No.
It is specifically designed for male severe erectile dysfunction.
Yeah, the trial protocol is incredibly precise. It involves injecting 5 milliliters of exosomes directly into the corpus cavernosa of the penis once a week for 6 weeks.
They even detail placing a tourniquet at the base of the penis for 10 minutes after the injection to ensure the exosomes don't spread systemically and remain localized in the erectile tissue.
It is a highly specific, standardized, rigorously structured clinical trial designed to definitively measure the safety and efficacy of exosomes for male sexual function, utilizing validated scoring systems like the International Index of Erectile Function, or the IEF-5.
I have to synthesize this because the discrepancy is wild. We have this massive commercial market aggressively selling female sexual rejuvenation using exosomes.
Right.
The luxury clinics are charging a premium, the femtech venture capitalists are raking in billions, and women are being told this is the cutting edge of intimate wellness.
Yeah.
Yet, the rigorous registered clinical trial we have in our stack of evidence is focused entirely on male erections. Meanwhile, the official female medical guidelines are still telling women to use estrogen creams.
Exactly.
How did we get a commercial market for women without the foundational female clinical trials?
It highlights the profound gap between the rapid commercialization of regenerative aesthetics and the much slower, traditionally male-focused world of standardized medical research.
Yeah, it really does.
For men, exosome therapy for sexual dysfunction is being put through the paces of a registered clinical trial with standardized metrics. For women, it is being rolled out rapidly in private aesthetic clinics based largely on theoretical science, anecdotal success, and preliminary data.
It is being funded almost entirely by out-of-pocket consumer spending rather than foundational medical research grants.
It's the commercialization of hope, in a way. Women know their bodies aren't responding the way they used to. They're experiencing tangible pain or numbness.
And let's be honest, the traditional medical establishment has historically dismissed or minimized a lot of female sexual pain.
Oh, absolutely. So when a luxury clinic offers a high-tech cellular text message that makes perfect biological sense on paper without the burning of a laser, of course the market explodes.
Because the biological mechanisms of exosomes, the targeted angiogenesis, the collagen synthesis, the powerful reduction of inflammation, they are scientifically sound principles.
That is exactly why they are being formally studied for male ED and for lung damage and for joint repair.
Yeah.
The potential for female vaginal tissue repair and enhanced sensation is genuinely vast.
But the hard, randomized, peer-reviewed clinical data to definitively prove it enhances female orgasm just hasn't caught up to the marketing brochures yet.
Right.
So what does this all mean? For you, listening, it means you are now equipped to see past the flashy clinic marketing and understand the actual biology at play.
Exosome treatments offer a fascinating non-surgical method to theoretically boost sexual sensation and arousal.
They do this by harnessing the communication power of stem cells, using those cellular text messages to instruct the vaginal tissue to regenerate blood vessels, build collagen, and fight localized inflammation.
All without causing the tissue trauma that older laser therapies rely on.
But it also means recognizing that while the femtech market is booming to the tune of billions of dollars, rigorous clinical guidelines for women are lagging behind the commercial enthusiasm.
Yeah, the treatment makes immense biological sense, but it currently exists more in the realm of private luxury aesthetics than standardized, scientifically proven medical care.
Which brings us back to the reality of the landscape. In female sexual wellness, we are still staring at a somewhat murky picture, waiting for the funded science to catch up to the multi-billion-dollar sales pitch.
Definitely.
And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, based on everything we uncovered today. If the biological mechanisms of exosome therapy, the tissue repair and blood vessel generation, are proving promising enough to be formally and rigorously trialed for male erectile dysfunction, How long will it take for the medical establishment to fund the exact same rigorous trials for female sexual pleasure, rather than leaving it exclusively to the commercial aesthetics market? We will leave that with you to think about. Thanks for diving deep with us today.